Welcome to the first real video in this course, and it's just going to be a brief introduction. We've already talked about this in the course introduction, but I do want to add in an intelligence life cycle into the conversation so that you understand what this is. So again, what is OSINT? OSINT is open source intelligence. So we're going to be using a multitude of methodologies in this course in order to gather information on people, on businesses, and other items that is all publicly available. This is all public information. Okay, so this is open source to us. So with that being said, I've already talked about this. I really want to talk about the intelligence life cycle just for a minute. So when we talk about the intelligence life cycle, there are 5 parts to the intelligence life cycle. Now there's planning and direction. So those are your who, what, when, where, why type deal. So let's say that somebody has instructed you to gather information. Maybe you have signed a client and the client says, I want you to gather as much information about us that you can. And you say, okay, we'll do that. So then you start doing your planning. Who are we going to target? What are we going to target? Why are we going to target them? When are we going to do it? These are all identified in the planning and direction phase. Once you have identified and your target, you've done your planning, you're ready to move on, then you go into the collection phase. And majority of this course is about collection. That is the methodology that we're going to be doing. How do we gather image information, or how do we gather data from an image? What can we tell about an image? How do we gather the image itself? How do we gather names from an organization or people that work at an organization? Or how do we gather information about people? This is all collection. So the majority of our time in this course is going to be spent in the collection phase of the intelligence lifecycle. From there, we're going to move on to processing and exploitation. We're not going to do any exploitation or really any processing. Processing is about taking the data that you've gathered and starting to interpret it. You're starting to process the data, okay? That moves into analysis and production, which is similar in the sense that you're analyzing the data and you're putting it into, I guess, an intellectual form. You're starting to take all the data points that you've gathered and you process, and you're saying, hey, this data point ties to this data point that ties to this data point, and this is why, okay? And then you produce a report, you produce some sort of document, you provide that, and you put that into the last phase, which is dissemination, and you present that to your client or your customer, whoever it may be that requested the information, and you make sure that they can understand it. So from the get-go, this is a never-ending life cycle, okay? And this doesn't have to be done in a specific order. You can start doing your planning, right? And then when you get into the collection phase, you might realize, okay, I'm starting to gather some data, but I don't know what to do with it. Go back to planning and add more stuff in, right? Do more planning, go back to collection. Or you could be processing the data and analyzing the data as you're collecting it. And then going back and collecting more data to provide more evidence for what you're collecting. So this life cycle is always ongoing. I just want you to understand that this life cycle exists. This is one of the core things I think that are taught in most intelligence type courses, and we're briefly going over it. I feel like you could do an entire course on this. I just want you to understand that in this course, we are primarily going to be on the collection phase. We're going to do a challenge that gathers some information, and we'll analyze some of the information, and then we will put that into a report and understand what a report looks like. But we're not going through the full life cycle in a true sense. We're going to work more on collection phases. But I want you to be aware that the life cycle exists and that it's super important for the intelligence field. So that being said, we're going to go ahead now and move on to the note-taking part of our course.